Hey guys, this is chess coach Andrew Rankin, back with another video in the series Buffing Your Black Repertoire. Today's game returns to the semi-Slav. This time, however, we go down a not-so-common line, the Abraham's defense, more commonly known as the Noteboom, named after the 1930s non-titled Dutch player Daniel Noteboom. I love playing this opening myself and find that it is a great weapon against solid, non-confrontational opponents who play the Queen's Gambit. Most importantly, this variation gives black quick equality and a clear game plan right out of the opening. I have noticed, however, that it is hard to find educational content on this defense for black, despite having been played at the highest level by American Super Grandmaster Hikaru Nakamura and Russian Super GM Alexander Grishuk. So hopefully this can aid people looking for more example games in the Noteboom. The game starts with d4, d5, c4, the Queen's Gambit, c6, the Slav defense, knight to c3, putting pressure on the center, and e6, the semi-Slav. As I noted in the first game in this series, white really has two key moves here, and that's e3, which we already looked at, and knight to f3, which we're going to look at today. Knight to f3 is the main line, but it does not defend the c4 pawn. So white, if you're not careful, if you play a move like knight to f6, then bishop g5, bishop e7, e3, bishop d3, and white gets their cake and they get to eat it too, right? They get perfect knights, perfect bishops, control of the center, and they're going to castle to safety and probably have a great game. So we need to throw a wrench into white's plans, and that's why we play d takes c4. And now white has to spend time defending this pawn, otherwise we're just going to play b5 and be up a pawn. So white's going to play the move a4, preventing b5. We want to play b5, so we need to pin the knight on c3. So we play bishop to b4. And now our opponent plays e3, threatening bishop takes c4. I should note that the move e4 is a bit of a mistake because sometime in the future we would play a move like knight to f6 and we would win a tempo on the e4 pawn. So that's why e3 is the main line. Now we play b5 because that was our plan. Our opponent plays a takes b5, pawn takes b5, and bishop b2. I should note that back here, our opponent can play bishop b2, but both lines transpose. It's just a different move order. So in this game, we had a takes b, c takes b, and bishop d2. And now our opponent is threatening knight takes b5. We can't play a6, defending the pawn, because he can play knight takes anyway, because the a pawn is pinned to the rook. So we need to get rid of the knight. So we play bishop takes c3, bishop takes c3. Pawn takes c3 would just create a bad bishop on d2, and that would be a really poor move. And now our light squares are our dark squares are incredibly weak. So we have pawns on light squares, and putting a pawn on another light square like a6 would be a huge mistake. So we need to start fighting back on the dark square pawn complex. And we play the move a5, preventing bishop to b4, which would prevent us from castling and be all kinds of bad. So now our opponent has to play one move and only one move if they want to hold on, or if they want to take back the pawn that we won in the opening, and they have to play the move b3. And the reason why b3 is so strong is because we can't take, because then bishop takes with check, and then queen takes on b3, and not only is our entire queenside falling apart, but we're also losing our extra pawn as well as an additional pawn. So that would be terrible because we also have no bishop pair, so black would be busted there. We would love to play the move b4, but again the a5 pawn is pinned to the rook, so bishop takes b4. So in order to facilitate the move b4, we need to protect the rook. And that's why we develop our first piece with bishop to b7. Now he takes, and instead of taking back, which would be a mistake, we push. The bishop drops back to b2, potentially being a strong piece in the future. And we enter the last several moves of the Noteboom opening theory. So there's 14 moves in the Noteboom opening theory, and we're currently on move 12. Here it's very important that black plays the move knight to f6. If we play the move knight b to d7, then e5, and we're probably going to lose a rook, or have a damaged pawn structure. That's not good. So we need to prevent the move e5, d5 by playing knight to f6, blocking up this bishop. White continues developing with bishop to d3, castles, castles, and now the knight on b8 goes to d7. And I had a student ask me why not on c6, because that looks like a better square, it's closer to the center. That would be a mistake for two reasons. The first is that it blocks in this beautiful bishop. We spent all this time moving our queenside pawns, so this bishop wants to be open at all times. And the second and most important reason is that if the c5 square ever opens up, the knight wants to go to c5, facilitating b3, a4, a3, a2. So a knight on c5 is basically winning the game because the pawns on the queen side start rolling and white cannot really stop them and engage in center or kingside attacks, trying to facilitate counterplay. So my opponent played queen to c2, and now you should really play the move queen to c7 so that you can meet e4 with e5, takes knight here, and this is already, I think, -2 or -1 for black. So this position is really good because we're going to win the pawn, and then we're going to be able to put a knight onto c5 in the future. So again, we want to get this c5 square open, and if after e5 he plays d5, then again knight to c5, and black is doing great. So I made a slight inaccuracy. This was one of the earliest games I played in the Noteboom, and I played the move h6. This move is okay, it's not that great, because when he plays e4, queen c7, he now gets to play e5, and I have to play knight to h5. This is actually not a bad move, and you'll see that the knight gets back into the game very quickly, so black is doing okay here, just not playing perfectly. So that was one inaccuracy. He plays the move knight to d2. He would love to play g3, but then he drops the knight. So that's why he's moving the knight away, so that the queen can come around and possibly pick up the knight, since the knight has no squares. And now I have the time to play knight to f4. The knight is back in the game and putting pressure on his light square bishop. He plays bishop to e4. Any other square would simply lose the bishop. And any trades for black allows black to trade closer into an endgame where these pawns are going to be a huge strength. I played the move knight to b6. The idea is that after takes, knight takes, queen takes, and we win a pawn. So I'm trying to overload one of these pieces. He plays bishop takes, queen takes, and I liked this variation for black as well because now we're threatening checkmate on g2. And he plays the move f3. And this is definitely a weakening move, and we exploit this in the future. So now rook f to d8, threatening knight e2 check, and then knight takes d4. So he plays rook f to e1. We play queen to c6, getting closer into the action, putting more pressure on his pawns, and also controlling the a4 square so that in the future we can play a4, maybe b3, or maybe a4, a3. The rooks don't actually have to be on b8 and a8. This rook on a8 can stay here because it's looking excellent, but the other rook can go to the center. You really don't need to put the rooks behind the pawns to facilitate this caveman style pawn push, because you'll see that black gets a lot of tactical opportunities to push the pawns. There's a lot of threats on the king side, in the center, and then the pawns on the queen side allow black to attack on all sides of the board. So my opponent played the move c5, because it was really hard to find a good move for white here. But the problem with c5 is that now the knight jumps into d5, and he's a great anchor of this pawn. And so we're getting knights into key outpost squares, which facilitate pawn movement. And that's exactly what black wants. So he plays the move knight to e4, saying, hey, I get this beautiful outpost on d6. That is true, d6 is a beautiful square, but the knight is coordinating with 0 of his other pieces. And a knight on d6, I can play around it. If it's not coordinating or attacking anything, not sure it's actually that great of a piece. So I pushed a4, facilitating my pawn movement. If his knight comes here, he's even farther away from the action. So bishop to c1, getting out of the way of pawn to a3, threatening to take the knight. I played b3, attacking the queen. Queen goes back to b1. And now rook d to b8. Now I can do the whole caveman style, what I called it earlier. Rooks behind the pawns, because I really want to do a plan like queen to b5, knight to d3, knight takes, rook takes, or queen takes, and then pawn to b2, and we're winning a piece. So he took my knight, I took back. He plays rook to e3, preventing the knight from jumping into any squares and giving himself some lateral defense. I played b2, attacking the rook. The rook comes to a3. And I played queen to d5, getting the queen in and threatening queen takes d4, attacking the pinned rook. He plays g3, attacking my knight. And now I'm going to ask you guys to pause your video and find a strong move for black. Alright, hopefully you guys found the move queen takes d4. This is actually a brilliancy, because after pawn takes f4, we can play rook b3. So we're threatening to take the pinned rook, and if he defends the rook, then we can take the other rook, because this guy is still pinned. So he's forced to play rook takes b3, and now pawn takes b3, and we have rook a1 and queen takes rook. We have two threats, and he can't deal with them both at the same time. So he gets his king off the back rank with rook f2. We play rook to a1. And my opponent blunders here with queen to d3. The game is over. It's I think it's -15. But queen to d3 definitely ends the game faster than the top engine moves, which I'll show you in a minute. So I played queen takes d3, rook takes d3, and then I queened. And the game ended very nicely. Let's look at what would happen if he played the top engine move, which is knight to c3. We play this really cute move, queen to f4. And if queen takes b2, then we have queen h2, checkmate. Even if it wasn't checkmate, we'd be winning the queen. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. I really love the Noteboom. I think I've played it 4 times seriously, and 3 out of those 4 times I've gotten a brilliant move. So it really facilitates fun, attacking, tactical, and positional chess. And it's just a really exciting way to play for black. So hope you guys enjoyed that, and I'll see you next time. Thanks. Bye.